Okay, this is part three of the discussion on addictions and substance abuse in ancient Chinese texts. We're still focusing on wine because that's mostly throughout the history of China. That was the big problem. In part five, we'll get to other things. So this is part three out of five. And let's keep going. So we're talking mostly today about géhuā, which is the flower of kudzu or pararia. It's the flower of the plant that we have gogun from. So, so we're talking about this, and then there's one other herb that's commonly used, this Hovenia thing. So the person who really made géhuā famous is Li Dongyuan, who wrote Pi Wei Lun, and in that particular book, the discussion of spleen and stomach, then he discussed a formula that became pretty famous for treating alcohol issues. And so here's a discussion of damage from drinking too much wine by Li Dongyuan. And he says, wine is very hot and toxic. Its qi and flavor are both yang. Hot is, yang, and it's acrid is yang. And it's something insubstantial. So, while it looks like a liquid, like water, but it evaporates even more quickly than water. So I guess that's why it's insubstantial. If damaged by it, one should only disperse, don't supplement. The patient will recover after sweating. The next best is disinhibiting urination, which means promoting urination. So either way, sweating, you get fluids out, and urinating, you get fluids out. These two methods separate and disperse wine's dampness above in sweating and below in urination. He complains about people in his time were treating, wine disease from drinking, using some very intense herbs and formulas. So one of the formulas is really very hot and induces a bowel movement. And then they also use morning glory seed, which violently induces a bowel movement, and da huang, which of course is pretty strong for that. So, yeah, so, all of those things induce bowel movements. Here, since the problem comes from something insubstantial, alcohol, which evaporates, but these formulas induce a bowel movement, which is something solid and deals with yin and blood, then you're descending the wrong thing and harming the patient. You're expelling the wrong thing. And so he says this is a great error in logic. The nature of wine is very hot, so it damages original qi. His use of the term original qi, he basically means post-heaven qi or zheng qi, right qi. This is not the same as kidney source qi. Anyway, so it damages original qi, and then original qi, so the drinking damages original qi, but then those herbs further heavily damage it by inducing a bowel movement and pushing too much substantial stuff out of the body. Moreover, it also damages kidney water. True yin and substantial yin blood both become insufficient because just all of this substantial stuff is being pushed out below. Like this, yin blood becomes even more deficient, and true water, meaning kidney, becomes weaker, while the heat of yang toxins strongly flourishes. So water is less, but these yang toxins are flourishing. So even though, the patient's given the formula to cure them, contrary to expectations, yin fire increases. Yin fire is a specific term, but I'm not going to discuss it right now. So because of this, original qi is consumed, breaking the person's lifespan. In other words, killing them younger than they needed to be, yeah. Or else it causes diseases of deficiency detriment because they've lost too much yin and blood and so forth. So then he quotes from géhuā. It says, if wine jaundice is descended, meaning inducing a bowel movement, it becomes black jaundice after a long time. Be careful not to violate this warning. Instead, treat the patient with his formula géhuā jé tang, which is géhuā hangover resolving decoction, which is a very well-known formula of his. So before we look at the formula, let's see what géhuā said about this black jaundice thing. It says, if somebody with wine jaundice, if you induce a bowel movement, if you descend their qi so that, they poop, then the wine jaundice will become black jaundice after a very long time. The eyes will be greenish black. I assume they mean the whites of the eyes. And the face will be black. In their heart, they'll feel like they've eaten garlic pickles, like maybe you ate something too spicy or garlicky, so your stomach heart region is a little agitated. The stool is pure black. The skin and nails are numb, and the pulse is floating and weak. Although the skin is black, there is slight yellowing, so one can recognize it as a type of jaundice. Okay, so here comes the formula for resolving hangovers. It treats drinking too much wine with vomiting and phlegm counterflowing upward, heart vexation, confused spirit, obstruction in the chest and diaphragm. A glomus is like a feeling that there's something there, a blockage, but when you palpate, you can't find anything in particular, but so it's subjective that they feel this blockage, but objectively you don't find it because wine is insubstantial, he said. The hands and feet are shaking, decreased food intake, and inhibited urination, like difficult urination. Excuse me. So, is this a hangover? Is this shaking hands and feet? Is this, delirium tremens that happens after somebody stops drinking when they've been drinking a lot? It's not really clear. Is this really just treating a hangover, or is this treating alcoholism? But people use it for all that. So here's the formula. I am not going to talk about every herb in the formula. You can pause the video if you want to look at it, or this formula is in Bensky, I'm pretty sure. So you could just look it up and read about it some more and everything. But even though géhuā is down near the bottom, the formula is named after géhuā because that's the famous herb for counteracting alcohol. We saw in the first of these 5 sessions that Lisha Jen talked about it and mentioned it, but here we're going to have more details of what he says about this particular herb. So the herbs that move qi and promote urination and, transform food stagnation and some supplementing and drying damp herbs and aromatic herbs to penetrate and to help protect spleen, stomach. So he says, finally, powder the above herbs, weigh them and mix them evenly, mix the powder evenly. Each dose is 3 chin spoons. So I think we talked about chin spoons before. So about 3 chin, mixed with boiled water and swallowed. Just obtain mild sweating and the wine disease will leave. This is used when there's no alternative, though, he warns you. How could you possibly just rely on it day after day, drinking every day and then taking this, drinking and then taking this, drinking and then taking this? The qi and flavor of this formula is hot and spicy. When you take it occasionally for wine disease, it's not going to hurt original qi, but if you take it every day, then, that's bad. So he's warning you this is for the rare occasion and that you shouldn't be drinking like this all the time. So this formula is the foe of wine disease, the enemy of wine disease. So, okay, then let's look in more details at géhuā. It was mentioned in Bansao Gangmu in the part about alcohol as being something that counteracts alcohol, but now here's the actual section on this herb. So its qi and flavor are sweet and level, which means not hot, not cold. It's non-toxic. It disperses wine according to Mingyi Bielu. And Tao Hongjing, who wrote Mingyi Bielu, said, together with small bean flour, which, you know, dough. So this has the dough. It doesn't have the chur part, but it's probably dough or other small bean flour, not the bean itself, the flour. So mix this with, you know, the bean dry and powder and take with wine, and then you won't get drunk when you're drinking wine. Well, for a lot of people, that's why they drink wine. But maybe if you're at a business meeting and you want to drink with them to be part of the group, but you don't want to get drunk, maybe it'll help. I don't know. And this herb also treats bloody stool, according to Li Shizhen. Then I looked, because that's not a lot of information. So I looked at what some other Bunsaos had to say about this. And here's one that's by a doctor named Zhang Lu. He's an interesting doctor, almost 1700. Okay, Qing Dynasty. He says géhuā can release wine toxins. It's used in that famous formula that we already looked at, the géhuā jiecheng tang. And he says you must use renshen at the same time, ginseng. Well, that was in the original formula. Someone who does not have wine toxins cannot take this herb as it harms the person's heavenly origin, tian yuan. So this is only to be used when you're drunk. Because it greatly opens the muscles and flesh. In other words, it promotes sweat. So venting out the toxins from the wine and damaging fluids, because when you sweat, you're damaging fluids and you're opening up the pores, the toli, the funro, the divisions of the flesh, and so forth. So it can cause harm if you use it inappropriately. Another Ming Dynasty text says géhuā. Its flavor is sweet and, you know, like neutral. It's slightly bitter. Its nature is cold, which is interesting because that it says sweet and neutral. Or maybe, well, I don't know. You know, it's a little weird because then it says it has a slightly cold nature. But anyway, it treats dizziness of the head and eyes, aversion to cold with robust heat. It resolves wine and awakens the spleen and stomach. It treats wine toxins and wine dysentery somehow from drinking wine. With no thought of food and drink, so no appetite, full stomach and distension of the chest and diaphragm, hiccups, vomiting sour fluids or phlegm, wine toxins damaging the stomach, spitting or vomiting blood. These are all things that probably should be a comma and a lowercase w, but whatever. géhuā disperses heat and resolves wine toxins. This person, this Lan Mao, he has more to say. He has his own formula, which is different géhuā formula. The other one was hangover resolving, and this is wine resolving, decoction. So it treats drinking too much wine, which he calls wine harm, with dizziness, pain in the brain, like headache, I guess, limp, encumbered body, spontaneous sweating, thirst, aversion to cold and fever, fullness, meaning like eating, you feel like you've eaten too much, and distension of the chest and diaphragm. You know, the word fullness here is the kind of full from eating. It's not the, you know, other fullness and distension. Yeah, this is specifically from eating too much fullness. Okay, dry hiccups, vomiting, cold face, distending pain, no thought of food and drink, no appetite, yellow face and withered flesh, so some kind of yin jaundice, it sounds like, and pain of the sinews and bones. And so géhuā, of course, is here. And then, you can pause and read the other herbs if you want to. I'm not going to discuss them one by one. He wants you, so these are, it's interesting. This is a decoction, but he still asks you to use danjuye as a guide. Usually you take, guide something to drink when you're taking pills, but I guess you're adding danjuye in. Boil in water and take it. For if there's a vexation heat, add jerdza. If there's cold in the stomach, add sharan. He continues. No. Wine conditions include constipation, no food intake, abdominal pain, aching sinews and bones, fear of cold with fever. This type of condition is quite difficult to treat. For constipation, one can use prescriptions to moisten the intestines, but one can't use draining herbs like bado. Bado is one of those that just induces violent bowel movements. If bado is used, you risk damaging the body and making the hands limp. So even though you've made the patient have bowel movements, you've harmed them in other places. Wine can also damage the channels in wo vessels, the jingwo. And so if that happens, there's withering and limpness of the hands and feet. You should select additional formulas when they're recovering based on whatever they need. The herbs in this formula that we just looked at are light, so they're going to go to the upper and outer parts of the body. Their condition will resolve after sweating. This formula is effective for mild disease. It's not necessarily for the really severe one. He has more formulas, though. This is still the same Lanmao. So he has a géhuā qingre wan, so a pill to clear heat that's made with géhuā. Drinking too much wine with wine accumulations and heat toxins. So this patient has a lot more heat than the previous formula, damaging the spleen and stomach. They're vomiting, they're spitting blood, or vomiting or spitting blood. They have fever, vexation, thirst, and scant red urine. So there are more heat symptoms with the thirst and the red urine and the fever and the reckless movement of blood. So we still have géhuā, which is, the main herb. It's named after that. But huanglian, which is, very cooling, and huashi, which promotes urination, but is also very cooling. And then a little bit of gansao, which he calls by a different name, but it's gansao. These are powdered together and then made into water pills. So these are not honey pills. These are pills that are, you powder the herbs and you make a dough just with water, roll them into little tiny pills so they can be swallowed. And then instead of counting the pills, they tell you to weigh the pills. So you take 1 qian worth of pills swallowed with boiled water. These herbs can treat stomach heat and excess fire, but don't give them to someone with cold in the spleen and stomach, or if they have like kind of sour swallowing, like they're, kind of having reflux of sour fluids, or if they're spitting out sour fluids, then this isn't the right formula for that patient. Okay, here's another formula. This formula actually comes earlier in time than Li Dongyuan's formula. Li Dongyuan was one of the 4 great masters of the Jin Yuan dynasty, and this Zhang Zihe, he was another of the 4 great masters, and he also had a géhuā formula with gansao. It doesn't have a name, it's just to resolve wine toxins. Gansao, géhuā, gogun, so both parts of the plant. Shaoren, which we saw mentioned a couple times, and guanzhong, another herb that's not that common, but it's not uncommon. Equal portions. And it doesn't really say what to do, but I'm guessing that you either just boil these as is, or you grind into a powder and then, add some hot water and swallow it. Yeah. There are a couple of cases which are kind of fun. This is also from Zhang Zihe, and he had the previous formula. So here's a case where there's a sleeping child that can't wake up. So some important governor, his young child was sick. The child slept and wouldn't wake up. On that day, all the doctors that came, they said, "Oh, it's fright wind," which means like infantile convulsions or something like that. Sleep fright, that's like an unusual name, but it's, they took, like, fright means tremors or spasms or convulsions. And some wanted to moxa him, and some wanted to use a pill that's called great fright pill. And some wanted to treat him with something, some kind of mercury cakes. I don't really know what that is, but it doesn't sound good. His father said, "This child isn't usually got fright wind, so how does he suddenly have fright? That doesn't make sense to me. This is just so sudden instead of a condition that developed. I don't trust all you other doctors." So he asked Zhang Zihe about the son's disease. And so Dairen, which is what Zhang Zihe called himself, diagnosed the pulses, and all of them were harmonious. If he had fright wind, they wouldn't be harmonious. Dairen said the pulse of fright wind should be surging, large, and strong, but his pulse is harmonious. This isn't fright wind. So then Dairen went to find the wet nurse. This is apparently a pretty young child, and asked the wet nurse, "Did you get drunk 3 days ago?" But the book that I got this from, the Chinese book I got this from, has a footnote that says 3 days is probably a typo. It probably should say 1 day, yesterday, because, well, we'll see why in a minute. So the wet nurse suddenly smiled and said, "The lady of the house used heated wine when she entertained guests. The wine smelled so beautiful. So I drank a jar and fell asleep." Okay, so that's her story. So she got drunk, and she's the wet nurse. Aged wine tastes sweet and is attracted to the diaphragm. The breasts are near the diaphragm, so it can get to the breast. The qi of wine is filling. The nursing child also got drunk. Zhang then had them boil gancao géhuā, shaoren, and guanzhong, the previous formula, basically, and made the child drink the liquid. He immediately woke up. It could be that he made the wet nurse drink the liquid, but I had discussion with Leo Locke. Some of you may know him. I'm pretty sure that's who I talked to. He thought that this referred to the child. Okay. Here's another very similar case. It's almost the same, but it comes from Gujin Yanan and by, a different doctor case. So a doctor named Liu treated a female toddler whose disease was sleepiness. Her cheeks were red, her body was hot, and all the doctors took it as chronic fright wind and repeatedly used prescriptions to attack this fright wind. But it's been 20 days and she hasn't recovered. So Dr. Liu felt her pulse. Only the right guan was slippery and rapid. All the other positions were of even size and harmonious. Because of this, he told them that the girl was not sick. The slippery guan pulse meant food retention. That's the pulse of the middle jiao, right? So he knew then that the wet nurse had caused it. The wet nurse must have been addicted to drinking wine, because remember, this has been going on for 20 days and she hasn't recovered. So it's not like it's the one sudden thing like the previous case. Anyway, so he went and questioned the wife, and she said the wet nurse was in charge of the wine cellar key. So she had been stealing and drinking wine to her heart's content. They made people spy on her, and they found several empty jars in her bedroom. So they took away the key to the wine room. The child was given this Hovenia thing, this Zhǐjǔzǐ, which we'll talk about on the next slide, and géhuā, the one we've been talking about all along, to drink. And after 2 or 3 doses in a day, she was good as new. So they knew that things could be passed through the milk. Anyway, here's this other herb that is also used quite a bit to treat, alcohol-related stuff. And this is compiled from different books. It's not from one specific book. It goes to the heart, spleen, and or small intestine channels. It's sweet, neutral in thermal properties, non-toxic, according to some books, or sweet, sour, neutral in thermal properties and non-toxic. It's contraindicated if somebody has deficiency cold of the spleen and stomach. It treats drunkenness with vexation heat, dry mouth, vomiting, inhibited urine and stool, so difficulty urinating and defecating. It treats headwind, meaning like chronic repeated headaches, especially when changes in the weather or when exposed to wind, and tension in the lower abdomen. It resolves wine toxins. It quenches thirst, eliminates vexation. It moistens the organs, stops vomiting, disinhibits. It promotes urination and bowel movement. Sorry. It eliminates heat above the diaphragm and functions like honey. Honey is moistening and nourishing. So I guess something like that. It also wards off insect toxins, bug bites and that have, reaction and stuff like that. So for internal use, boil 3 to 5 chen, and it can also be used in pills. Okay. Okay. And so here's another case. Somebody named Chai from Guanglu liked to drink. And he had diarrhea, abdominal distension. He was spitting phlegm. He had nausea and dry mouth. This was spleen stomach qi deficiency. Oh, this is from Shuiji, who's a Ming Dynasty doctor. But what we have to know about Shuiji is he thought everything was deficiency. Even if there's excess, it was due to deficiency. And he also very much liked warming herbs. He saw things as cold and deficient most of the time. Okay, that's his bias. Okay, so he said it's spleen stomach qi deficiency. First, I used Zhǐjǔzǐ tang, which is a formula he liked a lot, but he added shenchu because that can help, resolve alcohol and so forth. Food stagnation. So the phlegm and vomiting stopped. And then he used Bujang Ichi Tang, which he loved and used all the time. By the way, that's another formula from Li Dongyuan, who wrote the first géhuā formula we talked about. But he added some other herbs to it, including bancha because of the phlegm. The diarrhea and distension also recovered. And then he goes on to give some advice. So that's his little case, but not every case is identical. So if you come across something similar, but it's damp heat obstruction, then you should use this géhuā jēcheng tang, the first formula we talked about in this episode, to divide and disperse the dampness. In other words, to promote urination and sweat it out. If the damp is gone, but the diarrhea hasn't stopped, then use Zhǐjǔzǐ tang, adding shenchu to fill in spleen earth, which is what he seemed to do here, and transform the wine accumulations. Even though it was brought on by wine, the excess is due to spleen earth deficiency. So here, if spleen is deficient, then dampness can accumulate. When dampness accumulates, qi can't move through it. When qi can't move through it, it builds up. Since qi is warm, heat builds up and it becomes damp heat. So he's saying the root is spleen earth deficiency. And so don't focus on getting rid of the damp heat, focus on making the spleen happy, and the damp heat will dissipate. Now, you don't have to agree with him, but that's what he's thinking. And in Ming Yi Lei An, another book of case studies, then here's another one. So a Dr. Xiang, treated some military commander, apparently high ranking, named Zhang. That's kind of weird. Yeah, it's not the regular Zhang family name. Anyway, Zhang Lian. So doctors had given him ginger and cinnamon, but it became more severe. It doesn't say, is it dried ginger? Is it fresh ginger? Is it guager? Is it rogué? It just says ginger and cinnamon. But we saw that drunk people don't do well with guager anyway. Um, became more severe. So Xiang felt his pulse and told him, this came from wine. Your disease is probably, the symptoms, you probably had vomiting, noisy vomiting. Food comes back up after eating and difficult urination. And Zhang Lian said, correct. All my life, I've been addicted to distilled alcohol. And so Xiang wanted to give him this formula from Li Dongyuan, the géhuā tang, and adding some huangqin, cold herb, and have him drink 3 sheng of it to decrease the power of the wine. But there were a bunch of other doctors who were arguing about this, and they said, no, that's too cold, that's too cold. And so, they somehow their consensus was no. And so Xiang decided he can't help this patient if they won't, listen to the formula that he wanted to give. So he resigned. He went away. He said, okay, it's your problem, not my problem. And so the doctor sighed and said, the other doctors are increasing the excess and decreasing the deficient. Before 2 months pass, he's going to enter the register of the dead as a result of this. So he's saying this patient's going to die if you don't treat him correctly now. How did he know that Lien's disease? About that, the pulse was thin, rapid, and slippery. Rapid meant heat. Slippery was the vomiting because there was something substantial in his stomach, food and drink, I guess. Here, substantial we saw before. Other Li Shijian thought alcohol was insubstantial, but anyway. The nature of wine is very hot and very toxic, but they wanted to use hot prescriptions, so they're adding heat to it's already hot. This is using fire to help fire. Furthermore, the difficult urination, he said, is yang that's all bound up. And here, they treated it improperly, so he died within 2 months, just as this doctor predicted. Well, this is a long one, but we're almost done. So here's one more. We saw Zhanglu before. So here's his story. On the first night of a Guimao year, so like New Year's Day night, 2 gentlemen named Zhou and Shu went to some place, and I couldn't find out what this place actually is, but whatever place it is, they had fun. They indulged in sensual pleasures. And the next day, both were sick from the wine and they couldn't get out of bed. And so they were requesting the géhuā formula to resolve their hangovers. And so Zhang Lu said, even though Li Dongyuan's géhuā tang is a special prescription for injury from wine, people have different constitutions. So Master Zhou when he drank without restraint, his face was hot and he was very thirsty. You know how, especially some Asians have like flushing, facial flushing, turning red when they drink alcohol. Sounds like that was the case with this one. So this was wine and qi both moving throughout the yangming divisions of the muscles and flesh, because the face, is governed by yangming. I knew by the thirst that heat had damaged stomach qi. So how could we again, promote sweating and discharge and consume more fluids? If heat has damaged stomach qi, the fluids are going to be damaged, and now making him sweat will further damage fluids. So this one needs Zhǐjǔzǐ tang, removing gansao and adding some other herbs, including gogun, but not géhuā. Yeah. Uh, yeah. So Zhǐjǔzǐ tang has baiju, and then here we have zhǐshē. Remember from a previous week, those two herbs were mentioned for drunkenness in Neijing. Anyway, he will revive as soon as he takes it. The other guy, though, has suffered slippery semen for a long time. That means he's had seminal emission that kind of was uncontrollable, like serious seminal emission for a long time. So when he drinks, his facial color becomes more green. This is liver gallbladder that's habitually in control with injured kidney qi, because kidney qi is not holding, the lower orifices shut. So the semen is just slipping out. That's why it's slippery. Yeah. Wine and qi both move in the sinews and bones, so his face is not moistened above. It's like greenish. It's not like bright red like the previous one. And géhuā is a stomach herb. So how is that going to help when this is like liver gallbladder problem? So although I don't know about the formula he has, he says Wuling San, adding ginseng and doubling the rogui. Shortly after taking it, he will urinate something that looks like zhaojiao juice and will be at ease. So zhaojiao is this herb that is used in Chinese medicine, although not as commonly, but it's also used in making soap. So I'm guessing that this means this zhaojiao juice might mean it looks almost like soapy water coming out of him. Could be wrong, but that's what I think it means. Well, so you can see that the géhuā Zhecheng formula is not necessarily, not all doctors like it for all, things. Anyway, our last two slides are some modern research. And so you can see there's some studies here. You can pause the screen and then, you can look for these studies. You can read it and look for these studies. There's a study on géhuā, dried flower, extracts on blood, alcohol, and so forth. There's another study on alcohol that mentions géhuā as a big part of it. There's another one on gogun, not géhuā, hangover remedies. There's another one on the root against alcohol problems. Okay, so, and I think if you look for that other one, Hovenia, you may find some research on that too, if you're interested, modern type research. So this is part 3. Part 4 is like, a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and there's some acupuncture in it and so forth. Part 4 is kind of short. And then part 5 will be things like tobacco and opium. Yeah. So that's that.